Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. And today I have two very special guests back on, Bryan Boorstein and Jordan Limps. You guys at this point know both of them. This is our second kind of like round table. The last one did really well. I think we talked a lot about cardio last time, and I think we're gonna kind of switch it around. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about your guys' training, but yeah, looking forward to having you guys both back on. We're going to do more of a Q&A style today, which I think will generate a lot of conversation, and who knows if we'll go off topic or anything like that. But first, before we kind of go into the questions, I guess just kind of get a little update on both your guys' trainings. Bryan, we'll start with you, and then Jordan will go with you. Jordan, the only reason we're doing that is because your episode just dropped last week on the update on your training, but I still want to get another update. So,
Sounds good.
yeah, Bryan, we'll start with you, man, and then we'll go to Jordan.
Yeah, for sure. I parted with my cardio coach about 2 weeks ago. We were primarily focusing on VO2 max work, and I don't know what it is inside of me, but something about long endurance is just more interesting to me, or maybe less painful, one of the two. But I kind of want to get back into doing a bit more of that hour to 2 hour time domain stuff. And man, 7 minutes all out is it's just awful. And I think mentally, after peaking with that 7:03 row that I hit for the 2K that we talked about last time I was on, I just like mentally don't want to try to break 7 minutes. Like that seems like too painful to even warrant my efforts at this point. So doing the longer endurance stuff speaking to me more. And then with that, the plan is basically to continue with my bro split that I've been doing now for about a mesocycle. I'm approaching the final week here. And I'm going to continue doing that up through mid March. And then in mid March, Jordan and I get to go to N1 and do hypertrophy camp together, which I'm super excited about. They recommend taking a few days off before hypertrophy camp, as you would expect if you're going to be training 2 or 3 times a week. So immediately following hypertrophy camp, I go to Costa Rica for 10 days, and we're staying in this teeny little village that has a gym with, dumbbells up to 50 pounds or whatever. So I'm thinking that my bro split days are going to be put on hold for the spring and summer once hypertrophy camp hits. I'll kind of take a deload 10 days during that time in Costa Rica. And then when I come back on April 1st, I really want to go hard on the cardio, on the 1 to 2 hour time domain, working on improving my long endurance. And I'm going to be switching to a 2 times a week full body program. On my podcast, Eat, Train, Prosper, we just did an episode that was if you could only do 10 exercises for the rest of your life. And I was quite inspired by that because you can really cover the entire body over 10 exercises. And so immediately after that episode, I was like, this is what I'm going to do when I go back to doing cardio 6 days a week or whatever it ends up being. I'm going to do this 2 times a week full body program, and I'm going to use these 10 exercises for the rest of your life format and just split them across 2 days. And so I went and I put that together. And honestly, I'm already excited to get into April 1st and start doing that and kind of up in the cardio. But right now, still doing the bro split. That's going really well. Just literally an hour ago, I tied my all-time PR on my hack press in my basement. Uh, so that was cool. And next week I'll see if I can beat that. So it seems the lower frequency per muscle group has been good for me for the most part. While I'm still training 6 days a week, which it often feels like a lot, and sometimes I find myself combining delts and arms into one session just so that I only have to train 5 days in a week. I do think the really one hard session per body part per week has been nice. And I don't know if that's just a response to novelty because I've been training 2 times a week per body part for so long, or if that is something that maybe is long-term success for me in training. But I have enjoyed that, and my body has responded quite well to it. So that's the update. If you have any questions on that, feel free to dig in.
I think it's mostly blasphemous that you didn't have any knee flexion in your 10 exercises. Just saying. I was like, someone's got to say something about that. There not being a ham curl in here, man. No,
So you know what?
go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I was just gonna, yeah. So I was just gonna say, I think I'm still debating when I do my 10 exercises included in the bike thing when I'm doing all the cardio. I think I might turn the RDL into a leg curl just because I have really awful time biking after RDLs. even for like 2 or 3 days after, just being hunched over in that seated position. And so for that reason specifically, I might swap that out.
Cool. Yeah. I listened to that and I was like, I personally would have put a knee flexion movement and probably dropped something on upper body, but yeah, whatever. And no, there was no critique. I mean, you guys did amazing.
Right.
It was such a good episode. I love that episode. I was thinking about it the whole time. I like wrote mine out and then I was like going through it. And of course, there were so many similarities. And there were some, I think you only had one chest movement in there, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
dips. There was also a dips too.
Right.
Yeah,
And you had dips. I think that was smart. I think I was like, yeah, that would have been something similar. Costal cable press or a dip or something like that. Definitely. Yeah.
So was it movement patterns or like exact exercises? I need to go listen to that.
It was mostly exercises. Yeah, I would say we actually nailed down a specific exercise that we wanted for each. You could look at it as movement patterns, and I think what your personal preference is fine. Like when I say slight incline cable chest press or whatever, that could be an incline machine press. It could be an incline dumbbell press. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I did specifically state a movement. But yeah, I think you'd be fine to be able to swap in. Like there is no wrong answer, I guess is the way to say that. Regardless of whether you follow my movement patterns or create your own format of 10 exercises, it's all good. Everyone's got their own flavor. A lot of people responded on YouTube and wrote their 10 exercises in the comments, and there were some cool responses there as well.
Yeah, it's probably preference in terms of like what you like and the setup and whatnot. Because I love the cable stuff, but I know like for some people, maybe some of the setup for that can be challenging. And like that's one thing that maybe I don't know if it was with one of you, but like I think it was you, Brian, where we talked about like there's certain like setups and like ways to like you don't really think about the mental fatigue of setting up your exercises as being something that can weigh on you there with that. So but I do love all the cable stuff. I actually had one of the trainers at the gym come up to me the other day. He's like, "Hey man, I got a question for you." He goes, "How come you never use any barbells in your training?" He's like, "I just see you over by the cables." And so I just explained it to him, but I thought that was funny.
You explained to him that if you touch a barbell that your shoulder pops out of the socket like almost immediately.
Yeah, and you just get hurt for weeks on end. But I mean, I used to be like hardcore into like I used to do a lot of barbell training, but I definitely like switching over to more like cable and like machine type work for a lot of the stuff. So but also on that too, Brian, I was gonna ask you if like that kind of novelty was a big thing there, and you kind of brought it up. I was gonna ask about that if you thought that was something that was making a difference. Is that gonna be maybe something that you'll kind of hang your hat on moving forward when it comes to hypertrophy training, where it's like you might try to switch that around a little bit to get that novelty, or do you think that's not super important there?
I don't know, man. I'm still kind of wrapping my brain around it. The thing that annoys me the most about the fact that I'm doing a bro split, and I've commented on this frequency piece, is all the Paul Carter followers are hitting me up on DMs being like, yeah, maybe Paul's right about the lower frequency for this muscle group or that muscle group. And I'm like, I can't even like address this at the moment. It's just frustrating to even get that. So I don't know. I'll let you know. Yeah.
Did the Paul Carter followers ever have like I first of all, I love that you cracked me up because like it's so funny that like we can operate the three of us in like similar spaces, like and it's similar, not exactly the same, but like that the experience you just described of like his followers coming and DMing you would never happen to me. Like we just funny that like the three of us operate in like a similar space, but like it's still different enough that it never happens to me. And when I think of a Paul Carter follower, I just think of like user 81657 with like no profile picture. You know what I mean? Like
these are normal people, man. Like people that follow me and follow him, and like there's a lot of that crossover. So maybe you just have a bit less of that. Yeah,
no, it's good. I mean, I'm blocked, so I'm happy. I got a bunch of followers from him going on his little tirade once about me, which was nice. But then after that,
awesome, amazing.
Hey, you made it, man. Once you get blocked, you made it for sure. So, cool. Yeah, no, that's super interesting stuff. So, Jordan, what about you, man? Where are you sitting at? How's everything going on your end?
Yeah, things are good. We talked on pod. I'll keep it short-winded. The thing that's changed for me lately is like I'm finally fit enough to actually do what on paper might look like an actual running program. Like, and some of the things that have changed would be like, not walking during like rest periods during intervals, and like actually having two different paces of running that I can do. So I could run fast and then I can run slower and still recover while doing something that objectively looks like running, which is kind of cool. And I actually really had to tiptoe into that. And so, doing sorts of workouts where honestly it's psychological, because for the longest time intervals are about running and then walking and then running and then walking. There's something super psychologically comforting about walking, because it's like I know while I'm doing, it's like lifting. It's like while I'm doing my set, like I know I have 2 to 4 minutes to like fucking sit on my ass on the bench and chill. But imagine like you had to like keep doing bicep curls, but like really, really light ones, and like trust that you would recover if you keep doing that. And so there is a big psychological piece that comes from like knowing, like, once I'll give you just like strict examples. Like today I did a workout where it's like 3 minutes of running at an 8:45 pace, and then 2 minutes of running at a 10-minute mile pace. And it's like when I shift from the fast run to the slow run, I'm tired, and my body's like, oh, you probably should slow down even more. But there's something, a confidence that needs to be built, where it's like, I know if I go down to this tempo and if I just wait long enough, I'll feel better. And that is something that's new for me. And so it's been kind of cool to be like, actually see that play out. Normally, like, it's like when I'm done with this interval, I'll walk. And I know that if I walk for a minute and a half, I'm going to be baseline again. But running, still running just a little bit slower, and for the first minute of that, still being tired, but having the faith to know that if I keep going, I'll feel better, is something that, like, it's funny. It's like, if you are a runner, like, you know this, but like, and you've experienced it, and you know that like you could run slowly and not get tired. But like, as someone who's like not in good shape and is not a runner, like, that's really been new for me. And so that's been just a fun experience. Lifting wise, 3 days a week, full body. I'm probably doing what Bryan said, his like top, 10 exercises. I'm probably doing 12 to 15 exercises over 3 days, 130 minutes all in across 3 days. I'm still loving it. I feel like still I go into the gym with excitement. One of the big things, Bryan has a home gym as well. One of the big things for me, Bryan, is like setting up my home gym the night before has like completely reduced the friction needed to go in and get the workout done. Like if I have RDLs, cable press, like a chest supported row or something, and like to be able to put, and Jeff, you even said like the fatigue that comes from the setup, for some reason, like technically it's the same amount of work across the week, but doing it the day before feels less fatiguing. And so from a home gym like hack perspective, like spending 4 minutes the day before feels like it doesn't cost me any fatigue. But those 4 extra minutes like during the workout, like, again, I'm not saying it's like, oh my God, I can't get through it, but like it just is a nicer experience when it's already set up.
Yeah. I often do it at the end of the session prior, which is kind of the same idea. But yeah, to think ahead and make sure the bench is in the right position, the right attachments are on the cable machine, et cetera, et cetera. So real quick on the over-unders, as you were discussing, more or less, the idea of being above threshold and below threshold and kind of recovering. I know there must be some physiological benefit to that too, but I do think I agree with you in that the psychological side of the confidence that you gain from realizing you still can continue moving at something that is probably above zone 2 even. Like you're probably in zone 3 and yet you're still recovering as a comparison to being in zone 4 or zone 5 where you were before. And so I do a lot of the same stuff on the bike as well. I'll like sprint for a minute or two, and then once I hit zone 2, as soon as I see zone 2 on my watch, I'm like, okay, time to go again. So it's like once I get back down there and I'm still moving, So I agree. Yeah, it's a great tool and something I'm definitely going to be incorporating more of along the way.
Is for your guys' experience there with like that type of cardio where, it's probably a little bit more intense. And I know, Jordan, you kind of post this as well too, like about how, it just seems like it's more like mentally challenging, and like it would you say it is a lot more challenging than like just doing a strict like zone 2 session? Like I obviously the point of it is to be more challenging, but would you say, that is like a much harder workout than like you've done in the past? And because just based on like, kind of what you post on your story, it seems like those are like really challenging workouts, and like ones that you almost kind of like want to put off for as long as you can, essentially.
I think Bryan will be also able to attest to this, that like the psychological, like the perception of difficulty is multifactorial. I look at like my zone 2 ride, and I do that like inside on my air bike, and it's steady. Like there's the variables I'm looking at are it's inside, and it's steady state, and it's not even on a treadmill where like treadmills like feels like passive. Like if you just set the treadmill to 3.5 and a 10 incline, and you don't have to create the movement, you just don't fall. So that zone 2 ride is not fatiguing, but I look more forward to the workout I did today because I'm outside. It's intermittent. It has like short goals of 3 minutes this, 2 minutes that, 3 minutes this, 2 minutes that. And actually the whole workout takes, let's say 30 minutes instead of like 45, 60 minutes. So there's a lot of confounders there. Like I looked at today's workout and it's actually not, Bryan made a good point of like, yeah, there's probably physiological benefits, but this is mostly something I'm doing for psychology. So the RPE is like 7, and zone 2 would be like 4 or 5 maybe. But I look at my sheet and I'm like, oh, this is a workout I can't wait to do. Versus on Tuesday was like a threshold test. I know Bryan's been doing some testing. You did your 8-minute max row. We did a real threshold test, and we did that on the treadmill. And yeah, that was both really intense and not intermittent. It was continuous, 20-minute continuous kind of all out effort. And it was inside. And so it was like a trifecta of like not fun. And so I think it goes in, you have to take into account, like, am I outside? What modality is it on? Is it intermittent or steady state? And I'm not saying steady state's always less fun, but maybe it's always less fun, or that's always like in the negative column, I guess I would say.
Yeah, no, it's definitely less fun. Sorry, Bryan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. I feel similarly. I think there's something I really enjoy about the zone 2 rides. I find them almost bordering on the cathartic parasympathetic side of things, and that might be partially
before these. Are you like,
I certainly was in the past. New Bryan is not, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I find them relaxing and enjoyable. And I think part of that might be that I'm outside and I get to see nature and all of that, and the wind and the air and the horizon and all these different things. Whereas I find the interval workouts, whether it's over-unders or, zone 5 with more complete rest type stuff, all of that to me feels more like the way I need to get up for a 1 RIR set on the hack squat or something like that. Like it's a very different feeling, and there's a bit of nerve wracking associated with it. Like I kind of ruminate on it and think about how much pain it's going to cause me ahead of time. Whereas for zone 2, I don't even think about it. I'm just like, yes, I get to go do zone 2. This is going to be nice and easy and fluid, and it's all good.
So interesting. I'm the exact opposite. I feel like, the zone 2 gives me not anxiety, but like just like metaphorically or physically look at my calendar and I'm less excited. Even I'd rather a harder workout that's intermittent and outside. I guess it's also the outside piece. So what the interesting thing that's transitioned, I said earlier that I'm like, oh, I'm finally fit to do like something that looks like a regular running program. Like one of those things is, could I do running in zone 2? Now I can't. It would be a real shuffle. But I can do something that we would call more of like a base, which would be like really high end zone 2, low end zone 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's not zone 2, but it's certainly below lactate threshold, like VT2 or LT2, whatever.
Yeah.
And that for me is a fartlek workout, which I want to riff with you guys on this one thing. I'll talk about the fartlek, and then I'm going to talk about the training, lifting. So it's so funny that people come to these podcasts, like Jeff's like mind muscle connection, has both of us on. We just fucking talk about cardio the entire time. But I'll bring it to lifting we'll bring us all back to lifting in a sec. And so the fartlek can be at least one of two things. The traditional fartlek is more of like, go out at a pace you can realistically sustain. Again, maybe at like a base pace, and then run fast until you get tired, like faster, like over lactate threshold, and then come back to that base pace and recover. I probably can't really do that effectively without it being a really hard workout. So my style of fartlek is more of like an easy base fartlek is what I would call it, where I'm running at my comfortable pace until I get tired, because I'm not that fit. And so I couldn't even do that for 45 minutes. So I'm going out at my comfortable pace. And if I feel tired, I slow down. And it's what I love about it, a fartlek in general. The point of a fartlek, it's a Swedish word. Fart it means play, and lick means, I know it's stupid, like in English sounds like a funny word, but like fartlek, it means like play. Fuck, I'm gonna forget. It means like play, run, or something. It means speed play, basically. And so it's like supposed to be like a fun auto-regulated workout. And that auto-regulated piece has really been super nice, because it's like, instead of like 4 minutes of this at this pace, 2 minutes of that at this pace, it's like giving me the opportunity to reconnect with some of the subjective. And so I spent the first 8 months, everything, heart rate monitor, chest strap, fucking wattage, Zwift, training peaks, and gotten really into the like parameters around the numbers, and then having this workout be like, hey, go out for 45 minutes. When it gets hard, slow down. When you feel good, go faster. That's kind of what it is. And that's been so unbelievably enjoyable. And like you said, Brian, I get to go outside and do that now. So that's taken the place of one of my zone twos, which it's not a zone two, but we're kind of on the cusp of I can almost do this without it being a terrible SFR. And I'll link it back to lifting and I'll actually link it back to eating too. Is like when you get so far, like Brian, Paragon, Jeff, with your clients, what do? We turn these people into progression monsters, right? One of the best gifts you can give a lifter who's never tracked their training is to track their stuff and to try and progress week to week. It's like, that is just, if you can do that and you can ride off and meet me in 3 years, you're going to be stronger. And so what we do to these people is we make them progression monsters. But sometimes what we do is we have turned them so number oriented. I don't want to speak for you guys. This is my experience. That there's a little bit of a loss of touch with just what training hard to failure as an isolated endpoint might be like. And it's the same with calorie counting. When you start calorie counting, you're like, I eat to the number, I eat to the number, I eat to my macros, I eat to my macros. And you can lose touch a little bit with like, how do I feel after these meals? Hunger cues, satiety signals. And those are all good things, by the way. It's like, for some people, like it's good to get away from your satiety signals, hunger signals. Like 70% of our fucking country is going to be obese. Like most people shouldn't be, just eating straight to their hunger signals. And so toggling between being very number oriented and having a moment to connect with the subjective has been super nice. I've given my clients in my group an opportunity to do that if they want with certain exercises, where it's like either track one set or track nothing and just take your sets to failure. No gamification. We all do this. When you're trying to progress, sometimes you make a game out of it. You go a little too fast. You short the range of motion subconsciously. And so giving an opportunity to toggle between hyper number oriented, but also can we reconnect with the subjective has been nice. And I think that goes for eating and the cardio and the lifting. So, wow, that was a super long monologue. I'm going to go on mute. Somebody else talk.
No,
I love that. That was awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up because Brian, we actually had this conversation, I think towards the end of my last mesocycle where I was kind of like, felt like I was maybe a little too focused on like just trying to beat numbers. And so, I needed to kind of like go back to feel off of it, right? And like you said, Jordan, it's like it can be super helpful to help you push harder, but at the same time, sometimes you can start to lose sight of that. And I felt like maybe I was going a little bit too far on that end where I was just trying to beat numbers. And like you said, technique maybe was suffering. And then over time, I feel like that can potentially lead to some little kind of niggles from like, just like elbow standpoint, tendonitis type stuff like that. So, and then you do kind of lose touch with that RAR there. So no, that was glad you kind of brought that back to that. And then even the nutrition side of things was super helpful. So cool. Brian, any follow-ups to that or anything?
No, I love it. It was a great monologue there that I agree with fully.
Cool. All right. Well, let's dive into the questions. We're at 30 past, so let's dive into that. So I wanted to start with this one because I thought this was super cool, and I just wanted to kind of hear your guys' thoughts on it. So client asked, is there an approximate age range where it's more beneficial to stick to year-round maintenance versus like doing like build and cut phases? And he specifically said, I know Jordan hangs out in maintenance. May be interesting to hear both their takes on this. So I'll hand it over to either one of you there, whoever wants to start. We can start with you, Brian, since probably, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, the question was directed at Jordan, but yeah, that's cool. I can do it. So I think my answer to this has changed over the years. I mean, especially as we are men of science, and it does seem that science is more and more demonstrating that you don't need a huge surplus to make hypertrophy gains across time. You see a lot of the top science practitioners like Helms and the crew all kind of staying a little bit leaner now as well. And so man, it's tough for me to uncouple this because my personal experience was that the dreamer bulk got me the majority of the gains that I got, but there's so many confounding variables there in that I was in my first year of college, I was eating an insane amount of dining hall food. I was turning into a man, like literally going through puberty later than all of my friends. And so all of these things were happening at the same time that I also gained 30 pounds in a year. And so it's hard to uncouple that. And my experience was that. So I find it extremely beneficial. my recommendation doesn't echo that anymore, though. I think the earlier you are in your training journey, the more applicable a big bulk might be. And the later you are in your training journey, less advantageous that would be, and probably the more detrimental to health causes such as blood pressure, triglycerides, cholesterol, ApoB, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, I personally am erring on the side of a little leaner as well. Usually in my diet and cut cycles, I would oscillate between 180 or 182 at the low end and 202 at the high end. So I would have about a 20% or 10%, a 20 pound gap in there. And more recently, I'm really just trying to stay between 182 and 192. That's kind of my range now. And right now I'm at the top of that range. I'm at about 192, and I've been here for more or less, like, it oscillates up and down a little bit, but more or less since my bike season ended in November. So that's my view on it. Jordan, what do you have to say?
I feel like the benefits of more food. So what is the benefit of bulking and cutting? You could say that the body composition changes faster if you do that. And so I think that those benefits are for everyone. Like, for everyone, if you're in a surplus, you gain faster. A lot of people are like, I'm new to training. Like, should I do a surplus? It's like, I don't know if you should or not, but you have just as much reason to do a surplus now as a person who's advanced. And it's like everybody gains faster in a surplus. And so it just kind of depends. I don't know if I can say that there's an age, because if you look at me, the three of us here are far enough along in our training age where you could make the argument, if we were in court and we're like, all right, advanced people need a surplus more. It's like, yeah, they do, because the potential for muscle gain without a surplus goes down to a point where it's impractical almost at a certain point. So you could say, well, you should wait to do a surplus then. It's like, why? I mean, the person who steps foot into the gym on day one, they grow much better with a surplus too. And all of us, when we were young, probably that's when we did it. Well, I don't want to speak for anyone else, Bryan as well, but like, I did a bunch of bulking and cutting first, got to a place I was happy with, riding it out at maintenance. But that's, if I was trying to get it as big as possible, I'd still be doing bulking and cutting now. And so I think that there's not necessarily an age thing. I'd rather talk to the person and be like, well, what's your life like? Are you in like college where you have like, again, are you going through like puberty where you want to eat everything in sight? You're not worried about weight gain. Like, what point in life are you where bulking and cutting may have a certain impact on that life in some way? That's more of what I care about, because the 18-year-old has just as much of a benefit in terms of a calorie surplus as we do. You do, I do, Jeff does, like, there's a different context, obviously, where we would be doing it just to grow at all, and they'd be doing it to grow better. But the benefit is the same. It's just that our floor is much higher. Like, our threshold for growth is much higher. So it comes down to more practical terms. If someone's like, hey, should I do a bulk? I'm like, do you want to grow faster? Like, they're like, yeah. I'm like, then do a bulk, and you're okay gaining weight. Fine. Like, I tend to feel like, I guess that, again, a bias where, like, I think the younger you are, the less it all matters almost. Like, the more you're in this like adolescent meathead phase of like just getting really big and like not worrying so much about your weight. Like, it's almost like you're ignorant of like caring about your weight when you're younger, and you're just like, I want to get big and build a lot of muscle. But that's all. That's not for any scientific reason. That's more of just like, I think about how I thought about things then, and I certainly wasn't worrying about my triglycerides or my blood sugar, which, to be honest, spans across all ages. Like, I'm sure when I was 220 at 22 years old or whatever, I'm sure I had issues then, but like, I didn't care then. I care now. So I might be less likely to do that now. And so, yeah, I'm not sure there's an age necessarily. I think everyone can benefit. If you want to grow faster, go into a surplus. If you're really, really advanced and you want to grow at all, go into a surplus. And I think that I would just take it on a case by case basis.
Yeah. So it sounds like, again, it's not like a particular age, what I'm getting from you guys. It's like, you need to worry less about the age and more so, again, your goals and what you're comfortable with there with that. Those are going to be the most important things there. I guess one thing too, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. This is, I don't know if this is kind of your guys' like experience with this, but I feel like a lot of people, again, maybe overly focus on like the surplus that they need to be in, and they kind of overlook the like training side of things in terms of what they need to do there, right? Where they're like, oh, what's hey, I want to build muscle. I don't want to gain a ton of body fat. Like, what do I need to do from a nutrition perspective? But then they kind of forget the training side of things and like making sure they push that. Is that something that you guys kind of commonly see when, when people talk to you about this stuff?
I feel like it could be either or. I mean, I see just as many people that probably put too much emphasis on training and not enough on nutrition as the vice versa that you put out there. So, yeah, I mean, obviously both have to be in order. In some ways, like both are super easy at a very global sense because in nutrition, like, hey, just be in a surplus and eat enough protein, boom, solved. For training, it's like do enough sets, so enough volume, do enough effort, and get enough recovery. And it's like boom, super easy. There are when you're first starting out, especially even your earlier years up to intermediate, it's harder to fuck things up. And so you hit those rocks, those three things for training and those two things for eating. And I feel like most of it takes care of itself after that.
I agree. I think that I've seen both sides. I've seen people that are like, oh, it's a training. That training's easy. I go in, I work super hard. But it's like, it's tough for me to get all the calories in, or it's tough for me to either get all the calories in, or it's tough for me to face the fact that I have to eat enough to see the scale go up, I personally work with more people that are on that front of like the training's fine. I'd love to eat more, but I'm nervous about gaining weight. And so, yeah, I think that that's more, I don't know if there's like, there's again, we've all probably been into bulk, the three of us, where we actually got to a point where it was not super fun to eat anymore. But like that's in the 1% of the 1% of human experience. And so I'm not like, I think like Bryan said, like to get enough calories, not hard to get enough, like not technically hard. And for most people, like more fun. It's so funny. I always think about this. Like if you were to make a pros and cons list of bulking, I know this wasn't the question, but like there's like the pros is like outside of like I got really extra body fat and I got to a point where I was not healthy. You did it in like a smart way. The pros list is like never ending. There's only one con, and it's like I'm temporarily not that lean. And so like that's really the only problem anybody's ever facing really in a cut is like again, outside of like people who are like getting to a bulking phase where they're like, I can't even put all this food down. Fine. I just don't have a ton of sympathy for those people. Like I just like I get it. Like I've been there, but like I'm not addressing that problem. Like you can figure that out with more hyperpalatable foods. Um, and so I'm more so like the biggest hurdle people are facing is like, am I actually like I'm constantly confronting what I want, more muscle, with what I'm been told my whole life is not good, which is weighing more. And that's usually where people find, a speed bump.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. It's both, but probably at the end of the day, more people are worried about gaining weight than kind of pushing training. And Bryan, you kind of brought this up too. Eric Helms will kind of talk about like you probably have at least like one kind of trip to the well there where you can kind of have that kind of bulk where it's like you really just push it. And it sounds like all three of us have been there. I know I was there back in like my college days, where I was skinny, and then I was like, all right, I want to be, as jacked as I can. And I thought if I just pushed the weight, I thought I was just going to gain all muscle, and it ended up being a lot more fat. But I always attribute that like period of time to like, I feel like I did gain some muscle. I just obviously put on more body fat, but I do think that was really helpful to kind of break through that plateau, even though I kind of overdid it. But, you do kind of get that, like he says, that kind of one trip to the well there before it's like, okay, you probably can't do that again at this point. You probably need to dial it in moving forward.
Yeah, I think the partitioning ratio is probably just better when you're in your earlier days of training and you have all the hormones on your side and stuff like that. In my experience, I went to college at 170 and I went up to 200 in literally less than 6 months. It was before the school year had ended. And then I cut down that summer to 185. And I feel like my 185 was as lean as my 170 was a year earlier. So somehow in my like fourth year of training, I put on something like 15 pounds of muscle with that process. And so for me, like I said, it's just hard to uncouple the benefits that I got from that.
Yeah. And so I think really to sum this up again, it's like, stop thinking about this from an age perspective. Like you need to look at like, your goals and how far you want to push it. But obviously as you get more advanced, we know that we don't necessarily want to gain as much weight. We don't want to be in that big of a surplus. So it's like, you almost can adjust your numbers to that. But again, if you want to continue to build more muscle, you probably need to, at the very least, be out of a deficit at periods of time. But if you really want to kind of push more, muscle growth, probably getting into some sort of surplus is going to be helpful. But obviously, as you continue to do these building phases, bulking phases, you probably get better at them and you figure out, what's a good kind of range for you there versus, overdoing it and gaining too much muscle. Was there anything else you guys wanted to hit on that or anything? Feel good? Cool. All right. So another question we got was thoughts on De Sosa. I think I said that right. I know we talked about saying that. I knew I was going to butcher it. Post on length and partials. So basically, I'm going to kind of just read his summary of it. And it was, at this point, the hype surrounding length and partials seems to be more a product of social media than data, indicating that this method yields more hypertrophy. The recommendation of length and partials for training individuals lacks substantial evidence. For length and partials to become a tool in the toolbox, which he says he thinks they can be, more studies are warranted regarding the studied populations, muscle groups, and most importantly, higher quality studies. So yeah, they just kind of want to get our thoughts on that. Just because again, I feel like for the past year and a half, 2 years, it's been like length and partials, long muscle length training. And so yeah, I guess just kind of bring both you guys on here to chat about it. I'll hand it over to whoever wants to kind of take this first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I feel his skepticism. I know skepticism is the wrong word. His hesitation to go all in is not it's not necessarily a skepticism. It's just he's saying that the social media space has taken it further than he would. I don't think he's saying, oh, there's no benefit to length and partials or long muscle length training or anything like that. I think he's just saying, hey, like he's doing like I'm holding out a little bit before I jump in all in with this is the best thing ever. And I think that's super healthy. And he's a mega smart dude who like does the research. And so I highly value his opinion. I think that he makes some very good points about the number of studies that were in untrained people. I think he makes a good point that that the muscle growth in some of the studies, or even in most of them, I don't want to misquote him, was at the distal portion, was like regional, wasn't necessarily whole muscle. And only 2 of the studies were in trained individuals, and he makes some good points, and I'm on board with that. And so I'm going to use another post to just explain where I'm not. I'm not where Milo posted yesterday of the leg extension being the worst quad exercise. Like I'm so not there. And if we put, and I know that was for a couple different reasons, but it was essentially that the length, leg extension, and we're not having the exact same argument, but I'm not in a state of mind where I'm going to make that kind of post. Like I know where he's coming from, and he's making valid relative arguments about where the muscle is being trained based on what he thinks is the best thing to do about training position and resistance profile. I get it. But like I can imagine where he is in terms of jumping in with both feet, Milo, where I'm not there. That is coming from a place of like I'm really doubling down on this being the most important thing, and to bias to the nth degree on all muscle groups, And so I am a little bit more hesitant to go that route. And we could talk about that leg extension post if we want, which I thought was like. I thought it was missed a couple of components, frankly, just that I'm surprised he missed. But yeah, I'm on board. I think this guy's super smart, brings up some good. I mean, we need people like. I mean, we need people to like sound that hesitation alarm a little bit and to kind of bring us back. And so I like whatever. What's my position? I think that there's a benefit to training at long muscle lengths. Probably at this point, or I'd go as far as say I doubt we'll ever get to a point where we're like voluntarily foregoing the short position altogether across the board. Whether that's for orthopedic reasons or for regional hypertrophy reasons or for variation, I don't think I'm ever going to get to that point. And I appreciate his perspective, and I do also, before I'm like, hey man, I'm taking my group program and I'm turning everything to length and partials. Like I would. Whether I'd ever get there is up for debate, but I would need a ton more studies before I would say something as, I would say, blasphemous as a reverse Nordic curl is a better quad exercise than a leg extension, And so I'm far enough away from that sort of sentiment that I appreciate where D'Souza's coming from. Yep.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that as well. I also struggle with the untrained subjects being the primary subjects in a lot of these lengthened partial studies. We're never going to get a study with someone with 25 years experience because those people aren't signing up for studies. Like I would not be doing that. But that's, of course, we just need some data, more data in general. And so I agree with those points. I also agree with Milo taking it too far. I think the leg extension for probably no other reason than the stability factor and the ease of going close to failure is way more advantageous than a reverse Nordic or a sissy squat, which has such a technical component to it. And so I do think there are many considerations that we need to think about beyond just, is the muscle receiving the most tension at the lengthened position. I will say, from my understanding at least, and I'm not like the most in touch with the research, but I think that most of the lengthened partial work has shown equal hypertrophy at the proximal site and more hypertrophy at the distal site, which would mean it is showing full muscle hypertrophy. So I was a little bit confused on that. And then, kind of unrelated to the D'Souza post, but just something that I personally am skeptical about. And so we can go back to my beginning implementation of partials way back in like 2020-ish. I went out and I said very confidently that I wasn't going to perform lengthened partials on movements that were already lengthened overloaded, because I didn't think there was a point to it. In the last year, I've gone ahead and tried some of this because I was like, you know what? Everybody's doing it. Milo's super big on it. Let me try some like bottom 60% RDLs and some like lengthened range pendulum squats and all this sort of stuff. And I now am going back to the way that I felt prior, which is I don't really love lengthened partials on lengthened overload movements. I really think that the best use case for them is on movements that are inherently short overloaded. And that's been one thing that's been kind of oscillating in my journey. And I do think I have a more confident stance after actually trying them for the last year or so.
I think that comes from the fact that we don't know how lengthened, and we don't know how biased the set needs to be towards the lengthened position, how much time needs to be spent there, how much of the percent of the overall work needs to be done there. And so like what we like to take an RDL and only do the bottom, why, like, how far do we take this? Why not just do pulses at the bottom 10%? Like, why would we do that? Why do 60? Like, and so there might be, we don't know, a point at which making it even more lengthened isn't helpful, maybe harmful. And so that I'm with you, Bryan. Intuitively, it feels like doing just like bottom 50% squats. Like I don't want to, I think that there's a physiological discussion here. And there's also the fact that like, I fucking hate doing that. Like I just don't enjoy it at all. And so that's a separate argument. I will be 100% admit, but like you're doing your bottom half RDLs and I've watched you and I'm sure that you're like, kind of not like absolutely hating it, this is the worst thing ever, but you're like intuitively like, ooh, this isn't maybe doesn't really match up intuitively with oh, this is way more stimulative, way better, this is definitely the move. I know you're probably just like enjoying the exploration process, but like, do that for 6 months, come back and have an opinion of like, oh yeah, maybe I'm not gonna do that anymore. But yeah, I just think it highlights that we don't know. It's just like, hey, lengthened is good. So people are like, great, the more lengthened, the better. And that might be true, but we certainly don't know that to be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of it too, like I agree with everything you said, but part of it is like when you look at the total load that you can use, when you do a lengthened partial on a short overload movement, you're able to use more weight. You're essentially increasing mechanical tension in a sense. When you're doing a bottom partial on a lengthened movement, you actually have to use less weight. And so if I'm able to RDL 365 doing full RDLs and only 295 or 315 doing the bottom RDL, that seems to me like a less effective stimulus.
Yeah. So on this, Bryan, you programmed some like 1 1/4 RDLs for me. Man, I freaking honestly hated those more than anything. I thought those were super challenging and just really fatiguing from that standpoint. But and it was definitely challenging on like the pendulums and stuff like that. But I did like some of the I guess they're integrated partials is another way to kind of put those.
I don't want to cut you. I mean, I do want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
To be completely honest, I actually do think, and I should have clarified that I do think there's value in those like integrated partials, those 1 1/4 rep things, because you still get that kind of brief reprieve and rest at the top where you can reset and then kind of get back into it. I just don't love staying in the bottom position per se on these lengthened movements.
No, okay. No, that makes sense. Because that is different, right? So you guys were talking about like on RDL, you're just doing that bottom 60%. You're not coming all the way up. Whereas the 1 1/4 is, hey, you're coming down, coming up 1/4 away and then coming back down. on the RDLs, that was the only one that I didn't like. And it was just harder that way too, right? Because I mean, you probably need to use less weight on those as well too, correct? I mean, you shouldn't be able to do the same
Yeah,
amount.
well, you're doing more, you're spending double the amount of time in the lengthened position per single rep.
Yeah.
So in that case, yes. But if you were to look at it as like, okay, I did 5 1 1/4 reps, that's kind of equivalent to like 7 or 8 regular reps. I think on that sense, you might find that you're actually using a similar load comparison
I
each.
see.
Yeah, I
Um,
gave my group, hold on, I gave my group, we were doing leg presses, right? And we progressed. It's not actually the progression that I would recommend. I would probably progress in the opposite direction, but it didn't matter because like I wasn't so worried. Like if in hindsight, I would, whatever. I progressed from a regular leg press to a 1 1/4 leg press to a double integrated partial leg press. And so like a double pump, like 3 bottom position reps for every full range of motion rep. I probably would go in the opposite direction in the future. From a neurological perspective, you're probably adding load. But Bryan made a good point where it's like, if you keep the number of reps, imagine that progression of like 8 to 10 leg press, then 8 to 10 leg press with integrated partials, then 8 to 10 leg press with a double integrated partial. That is an exponential increase in actual reps and time. And I thought 8 to 10 went really well for integrated partial, like 1 1/4 reps. So you go all the way down, push roughly halfway up, quarter of the way up, go back down, and then all the way up. And 8 of those felt fine. But I just like lizard brain, like just subconsciously just programmed 8 to 10 double pumps. And I went to go do it. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, what did I do to these people? I was like, I should have done like 4 to 6 of these. Like they're just, it was like a 2-minute set. I was like, this is the most insane thing ever. And so I made a note. I was like, if we ever do this shit again, like you have to acknowledge that like 8 double pump reps is like, times 3, right? It's like 20 reps, so that was a funny mishap. Sorry, people. I mean, people were dying left and right. It's just like...
So I guess at this point now, how would you guys kind of program it? And I know again, Bryan, like we kind of seems like, maybe doing a little bit less overall. I know we still do a little bit, but like how would you guys kind of program these now based on, everything you've learned over the last little bit around them?
Yeah, I still don't think a whole lot changes. I mean, like I just said, I've kind of gone to the side of trying the lengthened partials on lengthened movements, kind of pulled myself back from those. But I still like really do truly find a lot of value in the lengthened partials on the short overload movements. And so I like them as partials after failure of full range of motion. I like them as just doing a set that's 20 or 30% heavier and staying in the bottom range of a short overload movement. I like 1 1/4/1 1/2 kind of integrated partials. And like I said, those kind of, I feel like can be used on lengthened movements to spend more percentage of time in the lengthened position while still getting that little short, brief rest at the top of the rep when you complete like a quote full rep or whatever. So like not a whole lot, I don't think changes for me. I still think that 70% of the training I program for myself and for others is going to in some way bias lengthened overload movements or the lengthened range of movements. And 30% is probably going to still have short overload movements and progress those into like full range of motion plus partials and things like that. So, yeah, I don't think a ton changes. I think I would have slightly more trepidation on, like I said, just lengthened movements in general. But beyond that, I think most things are just kind of as they have been for the last year and change.
Yeah, not too dissimilar. I think I am a little bit more. It's so funny. If you look at like where I would start a mesocycle RIR wise for an exercise back in like 2017 or something, I would start, even I was being coached by Revive Stronger, one of their coaches, and we would start, 4-3-2, 3-2-1, maybe 2-1-0. And or like 4 on everything, 3 on everything, 2 on everything, 1 on everything, 0 on everything, more like RP, traditional RP style. And what's funny is like it's gone from like 5 to 0 as my like RIR progression and for short overload movements. It's now at like 1 to -4, where like if it's a high stability movement with a short overload, high stability short over the 2 that come to mind, leg extension and chest supported rowing, I'm like, hey guys, let's start at 1 RIR and then, or start with like a full ROM set to failure and just progress. I'm doing in my group right now, forced progression. So it's like, hey, we're going to start with one set to absolute failure in week 1 on your chest supported row. The second set is a partial rep match. We're only doing 2 sets. And then every set, every week, you're just adding a rep. I don't care what it costs, right? I don't care what happens to the range of motion. And I think that that's a little bullish. It definitely went with 2 sets. Would not do that on the vast majority of movements. But chest supported rows, I feel like I'm like making up for lost time with my back with length and position. I feel like the back has just been overall like it's like if the back just doesn't have an opportunity to have a lengthened resistance profile or a lengthened position until recently, like with like prime machines, or the fact that people understand that if I adduct over, across the other side of the midline of my body, I can get really lengthened lats. But traditionally from like 1950s to like 2010, it was like pull downs and rows, short position, like short overload. And so I'm cracking up. I'm like, I'm making up for lost time here. I'm like, we're going to your back deserves some lengthened partials more than any other muscle group,
Yeah, I agree with that. The back has been the biggest thing that I've noticed with benefit from lengthened partials too. And then I also agree in starting mesocycles. Like Jeff, you've seen on short overload movements, we'll start at 2 usually, and then progress into partials by week 2 or 3 or whatever. And then on lengthened movements, yeah, I'm still starting an RDL and a hack squat at 4. Like that seems like a reasonable place to start, because a set of 4 RIR, if you actually have your RIR dialed in on those movements, that's still hard. I mean, it's really hard. So, yeah, I don't want to, put the cart before the horse too much. Wait, that's the way you say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I am.
We've said on this podcast though, like we're like, again, just when all this SFR was coming out, when Dr. Mike coins this term, and then we talks about the different RIRs and the SFR of those RIRs, I don't buy it anymore as generally. And what I mean by buy it, I mean, I don't like, if you can remain, I'm going to use the word not emotional about going to failure and going past failure I'm going to use chest supported row as the archetype of really high stability, no core engagement, no cardiovascular engagement, like no cost there. We're like a set to failure. Yeah. Okay. It's challenging and fatiguing, but like going another rep or 2, like doesn't make me feel like I'm playing with fire, man. I'm flying close to the sun. If I can stay not emotional about it, and when I say emotional, I mean like not screaming like, I'm like Dorian Yates style. Like if I can just say, hey, relax, like it doesn't need to be a full rep, pull as far as you can, at least until you hit a tight sticking point. I can get another couple reps and sit up from that bench and feel just kind of like I would have felt if I went to failure. And I'm not like, oh my God, that SFR is brutal. Now, if again, the increase of stimulus, it has like the fatigue cost of increasing your stimulus matters if you do it on a lot of things all at once. And if you're doing a lot of training, like the more training you're doing, the more you need to be worried about everything being too hard. If you made everything 1 RIR more and you're doing 6 days a week, 2 hours of training, yeah, you might go from perfect amount of volume to like, I'm dead. But for me, I'm not doing a lot of training. So I also know that I'm flying so far from the sun that maybe it matters a little less for me. So I'm trying to keep that in context.
Yeah. So kind of what you were kind of saying there and what you guys were both saying is like, maybe on certain exercises, if we don't need to worry about pushing it closer to failure or beyond that. And again, it's not kind of black or white there with that. And it's, dependent on the exercise and stuff like that. On this, one last thing on this, the back is one muscle group though, that has not been studied with these lengthened partials, right? This is more so like, we're kind of just theorizing here and like an anecdote and whatnot around this, correct? And it just kind of, again, lines up with, again, the resistance profile and everything. I agree. I mean, my back training, I feel like has definitely been, transformative in the last couple of years for sure. And, Bryan implementing partials and, working more in that lengthened position has really made a big difference. And, it kind of makes sense too, because I feel like, with a lot of people when they're typically like muscle groups they need to bring up, whether you're a bodybuilder or like you've done physique shows, I feel like it's always like the back, right? It's always like, hey, you need to bring up your back muscles. And it kind of makes sense, maybe we've been training them not optimally for a while there with that. So cool. Anything else you guys want to wrap up here with this? Again, I think we summed it up pretty well. And Jordan, like you said, I think it's good to have somebody break it down that's actually doing research, because I don't know how this has been for you guys, but for me, like talking to more people in the research, diving into it more, it's like, man, there's just so many things that go into it. And like, actually like figuring out, who the studies are on, like what they actually do. There's just so much more that goes into it versus just kind of like reading like the abstracts of things. And that was something that was always told to me like beforehand, but it was, how you hear certain things, you're just like, yeah, okay, whatever. But then you actually dive into it and you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, it really does, make a big difference. So I think it is important to have people that are actually in the research to help break these things down. Cool. All right. So let's go to the next question. So pretty kind of vague question here, but I think we can get some good conversation going with this. So how to train the glutes. So maybe, we want to talk about like movement patterns that we would do, maybe some mistakes that we see made. So again, I'm going to hand this over to whoever wants to take it first, and then, yeah, we can go from there.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk glutes. Like, I guess with the glutes, we'll probably be doing this episode on my podcast actually at some point. We've been doing this design series where we focus on specific muscle groups. We haven't done glutes yet, so this will be good practice. But I think that you want to focus on training them through a majority of lengthened movements and sprinkle in a couple short overload movements. The ones that come to mind first for me are a glute dominant RDL, so an RDL with a little bit of a knee bend. I would say even above that, if I was to make a tier list, would be some sort of split squat or lunge pattern. And I say that specifically because of the pelvic instability that comes with single leg work. And that inevitably is going to bring in more support and work from the glute to contribute to kind of stabilize the body and balance throughout those single leg movements. You can bias, the glute in how you execute that movement too, leaning forward a little bit more from the torso, keeping a mostly vertical shin, taking a slightly longer stride when doing that. You can also do RDLs in single leg format as well. So you can, use a B stance or a rear foot elevated. And I'll actually say that probably because of pelvic instability too, I personally get a lot more glute doing single leg RDL work than I do doing bilateral RDL work. So same thing applies, with the squat pattern movements and the hip hinge movements. And then beyond those two, I think you have some sort of cable kickback in there for whatever regions of the glutes you want to focus on. Glute med going potentially like 30 to 45 degrees out from directly to the side. Glute min going directly to the side, glute max going directly back. I would probably veer less glute max work just because most of the RDL and split squat work or lunge work you're going to be doing is going to be glute max. So I think using the cables to kind of get those more abducted angles is going to be more effective. And then sure, you can throw in some hip thrusts or some glute bridges if you really want to. I've become a bit I've lost what's the word I'm looking for? Some valor in my love of these thrusting and bridge movements. And I think a lot of it goes into the setup that comes along with it. I don't do them anymore in my training, and I do program them in my groups because the groups want them. But nobody loves the setup associated with these movements. And so if you do have, a really good glute drive machine or something like that at your gym where you can slide in and just have to load plates instead of all of the other accoutrements that go into setting up your bridge or your thrust, I do think that lessens the burden a little bit. And hopefully I didn't take everything. I'm sure Jordan has some other insights when it comes to glute training.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the split squat being kind of in that like upper tier, and from an instability perspective, I think even if you negate the instability by like really holding on, I know that there's still some instability at the joint, even if you are holding on. I think even more than that, I feel like the again more practically, like the percentage of people that can do a split squat really well and get to good depth. Like when I say split squat, it's just a split squat's just a squat, unilateral. So we're talking about it in reference to comparing it to like a barbell back squat. I feel like the ability to execute, get the right amount of depth, make it glute emphasis on all three fronts, get enough depth, like execute it well, usually less spine loading, which is not the end of the world. And make it glute biased is improved in the split squat. And so that is why I also put it split squat, reverse lunge, front foot elevated reverse lunge, like a good step up, like all of those like single leg lower body presses, even a single leg press. I think people end up being able to get more depth when they do that, more lengthening, and they can manipulate their torso a little bit better. I feel like when you do a bilateral squat, you are a little bit more like beholden to your biomechanics and anthropometry. And you're like, when I've actually like really come down from And I've done this a little bit with RDLs too, where it's like I was really bullish on a back squat being two different movements in my programming. So we have a glute dominant squat, we have a quad dominant squat, and that is certainly the case. You can do a glute dominant squat and a quad dominant squat for sure. But I've just been I've taken one small step back from like how I articulate that, because I feel like the percentage of people that can do it on a far end of the spectrum, really good glute dominant squat, and on the other far end of the spectrum, a really good quad dominant squat is a really small percentage of people. And most people can do they have a spectrum of an individual spectrum of I can do a more glute dominant squat for me and a more quad dominant squat for me. But the difference between them is close enough, and the reduction in weight from that occurs by you getting so technical about it. I've just come down when I see people in my group and I'm like, ooh, like, what if you just did a squat that felt really great for you and your biomechanics and got to lift the heaviest weight possible and get the most like raw stimulus magnitude? I'm not completely off that, because there is of course ways to bias, but the point I'm trying to make is I'm more bullish on biasing when it comes to split squats, because I have a higher faith in the people's potential to do a more quad dominant squat and have it be closer to like objectively what it should look like, and the glute dominant one more objectively like what it's supposed to look like. So I'm really big on that. And then from the glute, just bringing it back to like the actual question, I also have taken a step back from just where I would rank the glute bridge, you know, or like or hip thrust, whatever. And in the bucket of hip extension, short position, I take a 45-degree hip extension every day of the week. If you have one that's elevated that you can have an unlimited loadability on, like if you're like doing one of those like whatever, it's like a cheap one that like is really close to the floor, you have to hold the weight on your chest for a long time, that's going to work just fine. When you get strong, you got to hold north of 80 pounds. Like you're only doing that with straight arms. So I would take a hip extension any day of the week. I even think some people who are big on thrusts and bridges would agree that hip extension, again, that not just necessarily from a benefit gains perspective, but also Bryan mentioned like the setup, it's just like way less annoying and easier to execute, I think, for most people. Actually, that's not fair. I think that the execution can be tricky on both of those. And then the last thing I would add would be, I think when it comes to accessory air quote stuff, I think I agree with Bryan 100% that there should be some direct abduction-ish work. So like something where you're not in sagittal plane, something that is a little abduction-ish, where it's 30 degrees to the side, 45 degrees to the side, directly to the side. I tell all the people in my group, when they're doing a glute med kickback, we talk about that 30 to 45 degrees of hip extension abduction. I'd rather you be more abduction than more hip extension. If you're in your head torn between, well, if I twist a little bit more, it feels more to the side. If I twist a little less, it feels more to the back. I would rather you go to the side just to make it more different than the other shit that you're doing with, which is all sagittal plane, hip extend or glute max stuff. And so I love a glute med kickback. And you know, sometimes I'll program a standing abduction that's like direct abduction, but some one of those, if you're trying to grow the best glutes ever, one of those is in your program like in perpetuity.
Yeah. I can't believe I forgot the hip extension. That's like literally one of my favorite movements.
Yeah, you kill the hip extension, man. You're the like hip extension king, dude. You're holding the dumbbells the size of, you're holding 2 dumbbells of the dumbbell I hold a single dumbbell for, which is like, whatever, you're killing it. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love that movement. And then as far as the back squat and the glute dominant, quad dominant, the way we've kind of made sense of that in our group now, because I agree, it's been really challenging, is we literally just program a low bar back squat for glutes and a high bar back squat for quads. And that seems to actually work quite well because it facilitates the right torso position.
Interesting. I like that. I like that. That's a smart thing. And you kind of just let the chips fall where they may with that.
Yeah.
Cool.
For the hip extension, that can also be, you can make it more hamstring dominant, but also more glute dominant as well too, right? Like the 45-degree one.
Yep. Have you guys ever seen somebody do it with bent knees and tell you that they love it?
Like only online.
Yeah, only. All right. I've never and then also like single leg. People are, oh, you could do it single leg. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, in theory you can, and like I've done it in my gym, like, but like it to me, I'm like, this sucks. And I bend my knees, I'm like, this sucks. And I'll spend like 20 minutes finagling technique, and I'm like, this blows. I'm like, I'd rather, like, if I want to make it more hams or glutes, I would sooner restrict range of motion. Because it is kind of just a short overload anyway. Yeah. I'd sooner be like, hey, I'm not going to go all the way to the bottom where it's a little bit more hams to get out of the bottom, but like It's so funny you said only on the internet because I'm like, I've never seen and listen, we're bombarded with glute stuff all the time. I'm like, who's doing this bent knee? I just feel like it drastically reduces the weight you can use. It brings in like just a level of discomfort that makes it for me just like not even something that's on my radar. But again, if you love it, if you're out there, you love it, you do it great. It's fantastic. I love you. It's awesome. But like, I have no idea who's doing this and loading it heavy and getting a good stimulus and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the single leg, I think, because it allows me to use less weight. Like I feel like the stimulus is similar,
What do
but
you do
I'm
with your
able
other
to
leg?
say what? Oh, I wrap it. I loop it over the top of the foot plate.
Right. You put it on top so that you're like the front of your ankle is on it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll revisit it, but yeah. We'll see.
I was gonna say, I thought I've seen you do those before, Brian, where you do it single leg. I thought I've seen
Yeah,
that.
they're in my program right now. They're the finisher on my hamstring day.
Gnarly. That's gnarly.
So I haven't, Brian, like we haven't, like this recent meso, I was like, I probably need to get a little bit of direct glute work in just because I haven't for a while. And like when I was cutting, I just felt like, man, my freaking ass got super saggy. I was like, dude, I don't know if it's because I haven't trained it directly or what, but I was like, I gotta get a little bit. So we went to like we said bilateral leg press. And then last week I was like, man, I'm just not feeling this at all. And so I switched to single leg and man, that felt much better. The stimulus was much better. And you kind of mentioned the instability there can be helpful for the glute training. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think the reason I initially went with the bilateral there was strictly a time-saving mechanism because legs aren't a priority on this cycle. And so I was like, let's just get leg day done as quickly as we can. But yeah, for sure, the stimulus is going to be better with the single leg.
Well, I think I was the one that I was like, hey, I'll just do like leg press on. I think it was me. Yeah, I think it was me. So I don't want to put the blame on you for doing that. I think I was like, yeah, I'll do it this way. Would that be like the typical exercise that you would recommend for somebody like me, or would there be ones that you would prefer, like would rather me do?
I mean, for the most bang for the buck, I still like Jordan and I both agree that I think it's going to be more of a split squat type or a lunge, a reverse lunge, like something along those lines. I get a great glute pump from doing single leg press. Like I get that gnarly, contracted, kind of uncomfortable feeling in there, but I never quite get sore or get it's hard for me to say muscle damage is important because we don't know, but there is something intuitive about my glutes got more sore doing this movement than they did doing this movement. And that somehow correlates to the stimulus that you're receiving. And so I would say I could do one really hard set of one of those single leg free weight split squat lungy type movements. And I would need to do something like 3 sets of a single leg press to get a comparable second, third day feeling from that.
What are some common mistakes you guys see around like glute training? I don't know if it's like, I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind there with that.
Too much short position, too much emphasis on short position, ton of glute bridge, hip thrust, which are fine. It's fine. It's like if you're building the best glute program ever, it's the main thing you want in life. It probably involves that for sure. But yeah, too much emphasis on that. And frankly, the bigger one more than anything, there's two. It's just not training close enough to failure and the massive fear of weight gain. And I think I'll just put this out there into the world. You can agree, disagree, we can see. But like, I think when people are like, I want to grow a pair of glutes, I think people misunderstand that like, it's total subjective, and maybe I'm crossing a line here, but like if I were to like articulate my preferred what I think great glutes look like, it has fat on it. And it's like I think that there's like this misunderstanding of like I'm gonna build this great juicy set of glutes and it's only gonna be muscle. And that's just like probably like if I'm like, hey, send me somebody that you think has a great ass that hey, I want to look like that. It's like there's also a large component of this is like fat distribution. And so I think there's like a misunderstanding of like, I don't want to gain any weight, but I want to build this huge set of glutes. It's like, this is a literal oxymoron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I would say, getting into the nitty gritty of mistakes that people make is, if you do a split squat, even quad dominant, you're going to get plenty of glutes in there. But when you do a split squat glute dominant, it just feels different. It just hits different. And so the glute dominance would require essentially a more forward leaned torso and a more vertical shin and probably a slightly longer stance, which I think probably the most important one being the forward lean of the torso, at least from my experience. That seems to be the most important variable to really stretch that glute out at the bottom of your rep. But I think that if you go from performing them quad dominant as a general way that you execute them and you go to doing them glute dominant, I do think you would notice a difference there as well.
Cool. Do you guys have time for one more question? I don't think this one will take super long. Are you guys cool with doing one more?
Sure.
Cool. All right. So I think this will be a cool one for you guys to go over. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this, and it's how to determine the line between controlling tempo and adding weight for progression. Again, whoever wants to take it. Yeah.
Can you repeat it real quick? You totally cut out. It wasn't me not paying attention.
Oh, sorry, man. I don't know why that. Hopefully you can hear me. How to determine the line between controlling tempo and adding weight for progression. So like my kind of thought on this is like, okay, how much do you need to focus on like technique before, it like takes over from like adding weight and stuff and like progressing and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd start by saying just having a clear understanding of when you're not controlling the eccentric enough. And so that's like a clear line in the sand. There's a whole bunch of gray area of like, I'm controlling it with a 4-second eccentric or a 3 or a 2 or a 1.5. That can all be fine. And this person's asking like, okay, but like if I just go faster on the eccentric, then all of a sudden I got more reps. Is that progression? How do I toe that line? The first thing is people should be able to identify a binary line of I controlled the weight or I didn't. And just know that whatever we're talking about here, as long as you don't cross that line, it's all going to be fine. As long as you control the eccentric, it's going to be fine. The difference between a 1.5 second and a 4 second is nothing. But what this person's saying is progression week to week. If I am increasing the cadence of that eccentric, then I could be getting more reps and technically not, increasing stimulus. What I would say is, as long as you know where that line is, this all kind of like, if you're looking at this, like, last week I did 10 reps with a 4-second eccentric or something. This week I got 12 reps with a 2-second eccentric. Like, is that progress? That's usually where these questions lie. It just, to me, it's a reminder that like it all comes out in the long term. It all comes out in the wash. Even if you did that, the next week you'd have to show up and you'd have to progress again and progress again and try and progress again and try and progress again. And as long as you don't go over that line, like you'll end up increasing stimulus over time. And all of the training along the way, whether in an intermittent week-to-week fashion, hey, week 1, week 2 wasn't actually more than week 2. I bet you they're all above the threshold needed to make gains. Like if you're like the set to failure of 10 reps with a 4-second eccentric and the set to failure of like 12 reps with a 2-second eccentric, like they were both to failure, dude. Like they're both well above the threshold needed to make gains. And so I think that, I think that I know I just gave that's like a very overarching, hey, don't worry about it over the long term. If you train hard, you try and progress, it's going to be fine. That is firmly what I believe. More helpful answer maybe would be like to not go too slow in the beginning and to like find out that like, maybe my natural cadence for this movement, my most intuitive, my most flow state, what feels right for me. And for a lot of people, that's going to be in the 2 to 3 second eccentric. Feels best, and to try and start the cycle when things aren't that hard yet with something that you think, hey, even when things are hard, this feels like my natural cadence for me. But I gotta say, just I don't really think about this all that much. I'll start the cycle making sure I'm controlling the weight. And even if you took a picture of me a video of me in week 1 and a video of me in week 8, and it's like, see, you sped up a little bit. It's like, yeah, but there's also 30 more pounds and like 4 more reps on here. And like, it's more, and I'm doing more. Even with this like slight subconscious increase in speed, as long as you're not crossing that line, I guess I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I mean, I think in what he said that made sense was it all does come out in the wash. I guess the issue I have with that is just that obviously it blurs diagnostics week to week. And so you could say, who cares, because it's all going to come out in the wash. But I guess it does matter if you're trying to assess, how effective is my surplus? Am I actually getting stronger at this calorie number? Did that sleep that I had that was really bad the last couple nights impact my training? Or, how do I assess these things that are day to day or week to week if the way that I'm training is changing? So is 12 reps at 3 seconds the same as 10 reps at 4 seconds or whatever? And it becomes a little bit blurry when you're considering those other variables as well and trying to learn from them. So I would just say my general overriding advice for this is make it consistent. If you're having to speed up tempo to match reps or add load or whatever, then you're probably not quite as strong as you think you are. And you would be better off knowing that by keeping the same tempo and not matching reps or whatever it is. And so you just get better information if you're able to kind of keep things consistent.
Yep. So kind of heard both like, hey, at some point it's probably going to be a wash, but like you're saying there, Brian, like you probably don't, if you want to keep things more consistent, like keep it consistent, right? Then that can kind of tell you the things there that are going on. And I'm assuming too, that will lead down to like, hey, if you need to make adjustments from your programming perspective, you can do that. Or if it's, the right amount of volume, or like you said, does, your recovery need to improve, there with that. But I agree. I think maybe, don't like at the end of the day, don't overthink it either though. So kind of find that middle ground of like, you do want to pay attention to it, but also don't like overthink it. And then you get, paralysis by analysis where then you don't progress either. Right. So easier said than done, but cool. Is there anything else you guys want to hit on this topic or anything like that?
I think the best thing Jordan said in there was just use a tempo that's intuitive, because if you're using an intuitive tempo that just feels right to you and you're not having to force it, then that's likely something that you're just going to be able to replicate without having to put a lot of mental burden into it each week.
Yeah, it's just more natural. And again, like then you don't overthink it then at that point. So cool. All right, guys. Well, yeah, ton of great information in here. I guess to wrap it up, Bryan, Jordan, either of you can start, but where do you want to lead the audience to? Anything coming out on your guys' end that you want to let the audience know about?
Instagram.
Bryan Boorstein.
Yeah,
yep, Instagram.
Yeah. Come find us on Instagram.
Eat, Train, Prosper podcast. We talk about the same dorky stuff that we talk about here.
Yep, same.
This isn't dorky, man.
Not the same podcast.
Yeah. Sometimes I sneak myself metaphorically into the podcast with you and Aaron. I'm like, oh yeah, I always like Photoshop myself over Aaron's face. I'm like, yeah, I'm on this too. Yeah,
totally. You've been a guest as well.
Yeah.
I love it. Cool, guys. All right. Well, like, everyone probably knows about you guys at this point, so they know where to find you. But just in case someone just found you here, again, Instagram's going to be the best spot. So cool. This was fun. We'll have to do it again, and we'll talk to you guys next time.